We're going in a new direction. My name's Curtis Bell, 48 years old, 20 years with Hollowgate Systems, the biggest residential builder in Phoenix. I managed subcontractor compliance for every project from Scottsdale to Tempe, made sure every electrician had his license, every plumber knew the code, every framer followed specifications. The kind of work that kept buildings standing and kept lawyers away. The new vice president, Jacob Morrison, delivered his speech from behind my desk like he already owned it. Fresh from some corporate office in Denver. Probably never held a hammer in his life. His suit cost more than most of my crew made in a week. "We need someone with fresh ideas," he continued, not looking me in the eye. "Someone who understands modern efficiency." I knew what that meant. Someone who would cut corners and call it innovation. Someone who would hire cheap and hope nobody noticed. Someone who would nod when Jacob suggested ways to streamline the approval process. "I understand," I said, because arguing wouldn't change anything. 20 years of perfect safety records, 0 violations, commendations from the city inspector. None of that mattered when the new guy wanted his friend in the chair. The friend's name was Trevor Banks, 34. Graduate degree in business management, 0 experience in construction. Jacob introduced him around the office like he was the solution to problems we never had. Trevor had soft hands and spoken buzzwords about optimization and synergy. I spent the afternoon boxing up my tools, my code books, my files. 20 years of knowing which electricians you could trust, which plumbers showed up on time, which framers read blueprints properly. All of it reduced to cardboard boxes and a handshake from human resources. Walking to my truck, I passed the Sunrise Hills development where we had 3 houses in various stages. Foundation poured on lot 12. Framing started on lot 9. Electrical roughing scheduled for lot 6. I'd been managing that project for 8 months, knew every detail, every contractor, every inspection date. Trevor Banks would be taking over in the morning. I sat in the cab of my Ford for a long time, watching the sun drop behind the mountains. 20 years of getting up at 5 a.m., driving to job sites, making sure everything was done right, making sure families moved into houses that wouldn't burn down or flood or collapse. Now some kid with a business degree would be signing off on work he couldn't evaluate. Jacob Morrison would be pushing for faster completion times and lower bids. The inspection schedule would become a suggestion instead of a requirement. I started the engine and drove home, but something in my gut told me this wouldn't end well for anybody. I'd started with Hollowgate right out of trade school. Worked my way up from assistant project manager to compliance specialist, then supervisor. Learned from old-timers who taught me that cutting corners on construction was like cutting corners on surgery. Somebody always paid the price later. My dad had been a union electrician for 37 years. Taught me to respect the trade, respect the code, respect the fact that people would be living in whatever we built. "Every wire you approve could kill somebody's kid," he used to say. "Every shortcut you allow could burn down somebody's life." I met my wife Claire on a job site in 2009. She was the city inspector who caught a plumbing violation that 3 other people had missed. We argued about code specifications for 20 minutes before I realized she was right. And I was an idiot. Married her 8 months later. Our daughter Rebecca was 15 now. Sophomore in high school, played volleyball and wanted to study engineering. She'd grown up visiting job sites, watching houses rise from dirt to homes. Always asked good questions about load-bearing walls and electrical systems. Made me proud that she understood why the work mattered. The warning signs had been there for months. Jacob Morrison arrived in February, immediately started questioning every procedure. Why did we need 3 bids for electrical work? Why couldn't we use the same plumber for every house? Why did inspections take so long? I tried to explain. Code compliance wasn't bureaucracy. It was safety. Quality contractors cost more because they did the work right the first time. Inspections caught problems before they became disasters. Jacob nodded during my explanations, but his eyes were always calculating something else. Cost per square foot, days to completion, profit margins. The first red flag came in April when he asked me to reconsider a rejection I'd made on an electrical contractor. The guy had a license technically, but I'd seen his work on other sites. Loose connections, improper grounding, junction boxes that looked like a first-year apprentice had wired them drunk. Maybe we're being too rigid, Jacob suggested. Maybe we need to give people second chances. I stood my ground that time. Found a different electrician who cost $800 more, but knew the difference between a neutral wire and a ground wire. Jacob signed off, but made a note in his folder. I saw him writing it down. By June, he was questioning every decision I made. By August, he was CCing Trevor Banks on all my emails. Trevor would ask follow-up questions that proved he didn't understand the answers, but Jacob treated him like a protege, learning the business. The only person who seemed to notice was Bill Santos, the senior project manager. He'd been with Hollowgate longer than anybody, remembered when safety violations could shut down a company permanently. "Watch yourself, Curtis." He warned me in July. New guys looking for reasons. I should have listened harder. The betrayal came 3 days after Trevor Banks officially took over my position. I was cleaning out the last of my desk drawers when my phone rang. Claire calling from the city building department. "Curtis, are you still working on the Sunrise Hills project?" "No." "Why?" "Because someone just submitted a change order for the electrical contractor, switching from Martinez Electric to some company called Valley Wire Services. The application lists you as the approving supervisor." I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "I never approved that change. The signature looks like yours." I drove to City Hall immediately. Claire pulled up the paperwork on her computer, turned the screen so I could see. There was my signature or something close enough to fool a busy clerk. The application requested approval to replace Martinez Electric, a licensed contractor I'd worked with for 7 years with Valley Wire Services. I'd never heard of Valley Wire Services. "Run their license number," I said. Claire typed it in, waited for the database to load. Her expression changed as she read the results. "Curtis, this license was suspended 6 months ago. Multiple violations for improper installation, failure to pull permits," and she stopped reading. "And what?" "And working without supervision. The owner, Danny Vance, had his master electrician certification revoked in 2021. We stared at each other across the desk, my signature on paperwork I'd never seen, approving a contractor I'd never evaluated, who wasn't legally allowed to do the work. "Someone forged my signature to hire an unlicensed electrician," I said. Claire printed out everything: the change order, the license suspension notice, the violation history. I folded the papers and put them in my jacket pocket. Driving back across town, I thought about Lot 6 at Sunrise Hills. Electrical rough-in was scheduled for this week. If Danny Vance was doing the work, he'd be running wire through walls that would be covered with drywall next week. Permanent installation by someone who'd already been caught doing it wrong. Families would be moving into those houses by Christmas. Kids would be sleeping in bedrooms wired by a man who'd lost his license for dangerous work. I sat in the parking lot outside Holly's office for a long time, watching Trevor Banks through the window. He was on the phone, probably talking to contractors, making decisions about projects he didn't understand. Jacob Morrison had replaced me to save money and give his friend a job, but they'd crossed a line I couldn't ignore. This wasn't about hurt feelings or wounded pride anymore. This was about 3 families who would be trusting their lives to electrical work done by someone who wasn't qualified to plug in a Christmas tree safely. I started the engine and drove toward the state licensing board office. Some lines once crossed demanded a response. The Arizona Registrar of Contractors' office sat in a bland government building 20 minutes from my house. I'd been there plenty of times over the years, usually for continuing education classes or license renewals. Never to file a complaint against my own company. Margaret Torres ran the compliance division. Tough woman in her 50s who'd seen every construction scam invented. She listened while I explained the situation, examined the forged paperwork, ran the license numbers through her database. You said you were replaced 3 days ago. Officially, yes, but they used my name on paperwork dated yesterday. She made notes on a yellow pad. How long has this new supervisor been in the construction industry? As far as I know, never. Business degree, no field experience, and he approved work by a contractor whose license was suspended. Either approved it or had someone else forge my signature to approve it. Margaret leaned back in her chair. 27 years in the compliance division had taught her to spot patterns. Companies that cut corners usually cut them everywhere, and supervisors who approved unlicensed work usually had reasons that led back to money. Curtis, I'm going to be straight with you. This triggers a mandatory site inspection. If we find unlicensed work in progress, the project gets red tagged immediately. Work stops until everything's brought into compliance. How long does that usually take? Depends on what we find. Could be a few days if it's just paperwork. Could be months if they have to rip out walls and start over. I thought about Jacob Morrison's reaction when state inspectors showed up unannounced. Trevor Banks trying to explain why he'd hired contractors he couldn't evaluate. The Sunrise Hills project grinding to a halt while investigators sorted through every approval, every permit, every signature. There's something else, Margaret said. If this complaint leads to significant violations, the state considers hiring the original supervisor as a consultant for the remediation. Someone who knows the project, understands the issues, can help bring everything back into compliance. She handed me a form to fill out. Official complaint against Hollowgate Systems for use of unlicensed contractors and fraudulent approval documentation. I signed my real signature at the bottom. How long before the inspection? Could be tomorrow. Could be next week. We don't announce these things. I drove home thinking about timing. If Valley Wire Services had already started work on Lot 6, the electrical rough-in would be half-finished-ish by now. Danny Vance would be running wire through walls, installing junction boxes, connecting circuits to the main panel, all without proper permits, all without proper supervision, all in violation of state law. Claire was in the kitchen when I got home, grading papers from her afternoon classes. She taught electrical engineering at the community college, knew the code as well as any inspector. How did it go? I told her about the complaint, about the mandatory inspection, about the possibility of consulting work if violations were found. You think they'll find violations? I think Trevor Banks doesn't know the difference between a licensed electrician and someone who watched YouTube videos. And I think Jacob Morrison doesn't care as long as the work gets done cheap. She looked up from her papers. You could have just walked away, found another job, let them deal with their own mistakes. Could have, but you didn't. No. She went back to grading, but I caught her smiling. 20 years of marriage had taught her to recognize the look I got when someone pushed too far. The look that said I was done being reasonable. My phone buzzed with a text message from Bill Santos. Heard Trevor hired some outfit called Valley Wire for Lot 6. You know anything about them? I typed back, looking into it. The inspection would happen when it happened, but word was already getting around that the new compliance supervisor was making questionable decisions. Other project managers were starting to ask questions, starting to double-check contractor approvals, starting to wonder what else might be wrong. Trevor Banks was about to learn that construction was a small industry where reputation mattered more than business degrees. The call came at 6:30 in the morning, 2 days after I'd filed the complaint. Margaret Torres, her voice official and careful. Curtis, we need you at the Sunrise Hill site in 1 hour. Bring your documentation. I dressed quickly, grabbed the folder of paperwork Claire had printed, and drove through the desert dawn, thinking about what the inspectors might have found. The Sunrise Hills development was buzzing with activity when I arrived. 3 state vehicles parked at different lots, inspectors with clipboards and cameras documenting everything. Margaret met me at the site trailer, where Trevor Banks sat across from 2 compliance officers. He looked like a man who just discovered that business school hadn't prepared him for this conversation. "Curtis, we need you to verify some information. According to our records, you approved electrical work by Valley Wire Services on Lot 6. According to the contractor, you also approved them for Lots 9 and 12. I felt my stomach drop. Lots 9 and 12 hadn't been on the original complaint. If Trevor had hired Danny Vance for multiple houses, the violations were bigger than I'd thought. I never approved Valley Wire for any work. I've never even heard of them until 3 days ago." Margaret showed me 3 sets of paperwork, all bearing signatures that looked like mine, all approving Valley Wire Services for electrical rough-in work on different lots. The date spanned 2 weeks, including approvals allegedly signed after I'd been removed from the project. "The plot thickens," said Inspector Rodriguez, a heavy-set man who'd been walking construction sites for 20 years. "We found active electrical work on all 3 lots. No permits pulled, no supervision present, and the guy doing the work couldn't produce a valid license when we asked." Trevor Banks finally spoke. "I was told the contractor was fully licensed. I checked the paperwork myself." "Which paperwork?" Margaret asked. Trevor fumbled through a folder, pulled out a photocopy of an electrical license. The license number matched Danny Vance, but the expiration date had been altered. Someone had changed 2021 to 2024 with a pen and made photocopies of the altered document. "Where did you get this?" Inspector Rodriguez asked. "Danny gave it to me when I hired him. Said there might be a delay in the database updating his renewal." I almost felt sorry for Trevor. Almost. He'd been played by a suspended contractor who'd found an inexperienced supervisor willing to believe obvious lies. But that sympathy evaporated when I thought about the families who would have been living with illegally installed electrical systems. Inspector Rodriguez handed me a hard hat. "Curtis, we need you to walk through these houses with us. Tell us what you see." Lot 6 was a disaster. Electrical boxes mounted incorrectly, wire gauges that didn't match the circuit requirements, junction splices made with electrical tape instead of proper connectors. Danny Vance had been doing the work of a licensed electrician with the skills of someone who'd never read the electrical code. Lot 9 was worse. The main panel installation violated at least 6 different code sections. Circuits were overloaded, grounding was improper, and the service entrance looked like it had been installed by someone who'd learned electrical work from a coloring book. Lot 12 wasn't finished yet, but what was there followed the same pattern of dangerous shortcuts and code violations. "How long to bring this into compliance?" I asked Rodriguez. "Best case scenario, 6 weeks, if we can find qualified electricians to redo everything. Worst case, tear down to the studs and start over." Margaret made notes while we talked. 3 houses red tagged, work stopped immediately. Contractor referred to the state attorney general for operating without a license and document fraud. "Trevor," she said, turning to the man who'd replaced me, "you're suspended from approving any electrical work pending a full investigation of your qualifications and training." I watched Trevor Banks realize that his first week as compliance supervisor might also be his last. The Hollowgate office felt different when I walked in that afternoon. Word had spread fast about the inspection, the red tags, the investigation. Jacob Morrison's door was closed, but I could hear his voice through the walls, probably explaining to corporate headquarters why a major project had been shut down by the state. Bill Santos met me at the reception desk, grinning like he'd just won the lottery. "Curtis, you beautiful bastard. How did you know?" "Know what?" "That Trevor's electrical contractor was a fraud. The whole office is talking about it." I kept my expression neutral. "Just heard about the inspection this morning. Shame they found violations." Bill nodded, but his eyes said he knew exactly what had happened. 24 years in construction had taught him to recognize the difference between bad luck and careful planning. State investigators want to talk to everyone who worked on approvals for Sunrise Hills. He said they'll probably want your input since you managed the project for 8 months. Happy to help if they ask. Margaret Torres called an hour later. The state was forming a remediation team to assess the full scope of violations at Sunrise Hills and determine what work needed to be redone. They wanted an experienced compliance supervisor to consult on bringing everything back up to code. The pay is $300 a day plus expenses, she said. Probably 6 weeks of work, maybe 8, depending on what else we find. I did the math in my head. $18,000 minimum for consulting work that would take me through Christmas. More money than I'd made in 3 months at Hollowgate. And I'd be working directly with state inspectors instead of business school graduates who thought electrical codes were suggestions. When do I start? Monday morning. Report to the site trailer at 7:00 a.m. Claire was cooking dinner when I got home, Rebecca helping with vegetables while explaining some drama from volleyball practice. Normal family life continuing while my professional world turned upside down and then right side up again. The state wants me to consult on fixing the Sunrise Hills mess. I told Claire. How long? 6 to 8 weeks. Good money. Rebecca looked up from chopping peppers. Dad, does this mean the people who replaced you screwed up? Language, Claire warned, but she was smiling. Yes, I said. They screwed up pretty badly. Good. I never liked that Jacob guy anyway. He was rude to you at the company picnic. Smart kid. She'd picked up on Jacob Morrison's attitude before I'd fully admitted it to myself. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Curtis, this is Danny Vance. Need to talk to you about this inspection thing. Can we meet? I showed the message to Claire. The unlicensed electrician wants to meet with you. Seems like it. You gonna talk to him? Probably not, but I'll definitely forward this to Margaret Torres. Might be interesting to see what he wants to discuss. I forwarded the message to Margaret with a note. The contractor who used my forged signature is trying to contact me directly. Thought you should know. Her reply came 5 minutes later. Do not meet with him. Screenshot everything and forward any additional contact. This could be witness tampering. Witness tampering. I hadn't thought about it that way. But Danny Vance reaching out to me directly suggested he was worried about more than just losing a job. He was worried about criminal charges. Trevor Banks had been played by a con artist, but Jacob Morrison had created the conditions that made the con possible. Both of them were about to learn that cutting corners in construction carried consequences that couldn't be managed away with business school theories. Monday morning, I'd be back at Sunrise Hills, but this time working for the state instead of Hollowgate systems. Sometimes the system actually worked. The meeting happened at Hollowgate's main conference room 3 weeks after the state investigation began. Corporate executives from Denver, lawyers in expensive suits, and insurance representatives trying to calculate how much this disaster would cost. Jacob Morrison sat at the far end of the table, looking like a man who just discovered that his shortcuts had been documented by state investigators for 3 weeks. Trevor Banks wasn't there. He'd been terminated the day after his suspension, when Human Resources realized he'd misrepresented his qualifications on his job application. Margaret Torres presented the findings. 3 houses with major electrical violations, 14 instances of code violations, forged approval documents, and evidence that supervision requirements had been ignored for over 2 weeks. The estimated cost to bring everything into compliance, $430,000. In addition, Margaret continued, the state is referring this case to the Attorney General for prosecution of fraudulent contractor practices and document forgery. I sat in the corner taking notes, officially there as a consulting witness, but privately enjoying the look on Jacob Morrison's face as the numbers piled up. $430,000, 6-week construction delay, potential criminal charges. The corporate lawyer asked the question everyone was thinking. How did this happen? Margaret opened my file. The original compliance supervisor, Curtis Bell, had an excellent track record, 0 violations in 20 years, commendations from multiple inspection agencies. He was replaced by someone with no construction experience who failed to verify contractor licenses and approved obviously fraudulent documentation. Jacob Morrison tried to speak. We were implementing new efficiency protocols. You were cutting corners, Margaret interrupted, and when your corners got cut, 3 families almost moved into houses with electrical systems that could have killed them. The insurance representative was making calculations on his laptop. $430,000 in direct costs, plus legal fees, plus potential lawsuits from buyers, plus reputation damage to Hollowgate's bonding capacity. The state recommends that Hollowgate retain Curtis Bell as compliance supervisor for all remaining phases of this project. Margaret concluded he knows the development, understands the issues, and has the trust of our inspection team. All eyes turned to me. 3 weeks ago, Jacob Morrison had dismissed me for being too rigid. Now the state was demanding that Hollowgate hire me back to fix the mess he'd created. Mr. Bell said, the corporate lawyer, "Would you be interested in resuming your position as a consultant?" I said, "With direct reporting authority to the state compliance team." Jacob Morrison's face went red, but he couldn't object. Hollowgate needed state approval to continue the project, and the state would only approve it with me supervising the work. 6 months later, I was drinking coffee in my new office when Bill Santos knocked on the door. I'd been hired permanently as Regional Compliance Director with authority over 3 development projects and a salary bump that made the whole ordeal worthwhile. "Heard from Margaret Torres today," Bill said. "Danny Vance pleaded guilty to contractor fraud, 6 months in county jail, 3 years probation, permanently banned from holding an electrical license, and Trevor found a job selling insurance in Tucson. Apparently, his resume doesn't mention the 2 weeks he spent in construction." Jacob Morrison had lasted another month after the investigation concluded. Corporate finally realized that his efficiency protocols had cost more than my entire annual salary, and efficiency experts who created $400,000 problems weren't the kind of efficiency they needed. Claire brought Rebecca to the office that afternoon, both of them touring the new space while I finished paperwork. My daughter seemed impressed by the view of the construction sites. I now supervised projects where every contractor was licensed. Every approval was genuine, and every signature was actually mine. Dad, Rebecca said, "My engineering professor says that people who do things right the first time never get famous, but people who fix other people's mistakes get promoted." Smart professor. She also said that revenge is a dish best served with proper documentation and state regulatory compliance. I laughed. Did she really say that? No, but she should have. Driving home that evening, I passed the Sunrise Hills development. 3 families had moved into the houses we'd spent 2 months fixing, houses that were now among the safest residential constructions in Arizona. Every wire properly installed, every connection up to code, every system tested and certified. Sometimes doing the right thing took longer than expected, but it always worked out in the end.